You need to know how to bake your own bread. It's cheaper, easier and tastier than you think. And you never know when you might need to know how to bake your own bread again. Hi, I'm Dan Thomas and today I'm going to be showing you how to bake a classic white loaf. This is really simple and in just a few minutes time you'll be able to do it for yourself. These instructions are for a 4-pound loaf tin. You can get links to the tins that I use from my page. So into a bowl we're going to place 800 grams of strong white flour. It can't just be any kind of white flour, it has to have the word strong in it. The one that I like to use is this one by Allison's. It's called Very Strong White. Eventually you'll come to find one that works for you. So in we go with the 800 grams into the bowl. It's quite a lot, but because we're using a 4-pound tin, we're going to make a big loaf. Next thing we're going to put in is 16 grams of salt, just ordinary table salt. And then 14 grams of what's called easy bake dried yeast. You don't want fresh yeast, you don't want dried active yeast. You want stuff that's called easy bake. And again, the one that works, I think, is this one. 14 grams of yeast going in there. So you can either use 50 grams of unsalted butter or 40 grams of olive oil. And next 500 mils of cold water measured to 38 degrees or less if you've got a thermometer. And you want to pour about 3/4 of it in there, leaving yourself with about 120 mils still in the jug. Okay, now with clean hands you want to just give that a bit of a swirl around in the bowl and get it to start coming together. What you'll probably find is that initially it's still quite dry because there's a lot more flour in there than there is water. You'll probably find that there's stuff in the bowl that isn't quite mixing in, isn't quite coming off the side of the bowl. So what we're going to do is just add tiny bits of water just to help clean the side of that bowl. You probably won't end up using the full 500 millilitres of water. In fact, if you do, probably something's gone wrong. So just try and eke little bits out and don't use the full thing unless you really have to. Your hands are going to feel a bit gross and messy if you've not done this before. It's fine, just kind of power through it. So I can see now that I've probably got about 50 ml left in my jug and I'm not really having any trouble getting the flour to come off the side of the bowl. So now we've pretty much used all of the water that we need to. So the next stage is kneading. Now what we're going to do is actually oil our work surface. Some people say to use flour. The trouble with using flour in kneading is that you're effectively, well, you're adding flour to the dough, so you're making it dry again, which sort of reverses what we were trying to do in the previous step. So oil's a little bit better, it doesn't dry your dough out, and also it lets you kind of feel what's happening to the dough a little bit more easily, and that's going to be important as we come into the next step. Make sure your surface is clean, put some olive oil down. Next thing you're going to do, get our kind of dough, which now should hopefully not have any dry bits and no kind of major dryness left in the bowl still, and just get it down on the surface there. Pick some of these bits off your fingers and then we're going to start kneading it. Now kneading it sounds scary, but it's not. What you basically want to do is just kind of push down with your palm and then push the mix away from you. What you'll find at the start of this process, if you take a chunk of it and try to spread it out in a thin piece, it won't really spread. So if you imagine trying to get it as thin as a piece of paper, it won't really do that. It'll tear before it kind of gets where it needs to go. Now that's important because that consistency is going to change as we knead it, and when that consistency does change, it means that we can move into the next step. You're going to knead it like this, which is basically turning the thing towards you, pushing some away, and then bringing it back again. You can either do this manually, as I am, with some oil on a work surface, or you can use a stand mixer. What I'd suggest is do a couple of these the manual way first, and if you find that you really enjoy baking, and you will, get a stand mixer. They are amazing, they make things so much easier and keep your hands clean. But it's good to do this the kind of traditional way every so often too. What you'll find as you continue to do this is that the wetness of the dough will kind of disappear and become not drier, but sort of more like a rubber bouncy ball kind of consistency. It's also going to warm up, both from the way that you're working it with your hands, but also that the yeast that we put in earlier is going to start to come alive and start to multiply and burp and all those kinds of things that yeast do. Bread's actually pretty gross if you actually think about what's going on inside it, so don't think about it too much, but thank you, yeast. So you want to do this for about 8 to 10 minutes, which sounds like a lot, so just pop the radio on and think about something else for that time. Or alternatively, get that stand mixer. There's a few different models out there that people like. The two most popular ones are Knead and KitchenAid. I've got a KitchenAid, it's very nice. So I'm continuing to knead that dough now, and it is becoming more rubber, more elastic. As we're kneading it, we're creating what are called protein strands. These are the things that are going to give structure to your bread. It's still a little bit sticky, and we'll know that we're getting there when it just becomes, like I say, not dry, but just rubbery. Take a piece off now. Try and do that stretch that I was trying to do before. We can see now that it more easily wants to stretch out into a kind of a piece of paper. That would have snapped before when I did that. And it's still snapping a little bit, which means that we need to give it a bit more time, but it also means that we're on our way. So now we've finished our dough, it's passed the finger test, it's nice and rubbery, smooth, there's no kind of discernible wetness to it, it's not over dry, it's just kind of rubbery and bouncy, and you can do all this with it, it's ready. So what we've got to do is prepare a bowl, get a nice clean bowl, and just get a little bit of olive oil, tip it in there, and then get it all around. Now your dough is going to rise and expand in this bowl, so it needs to be at least twice the size of the dough. So don't put it in your cereal bowl is what I'm saying. So that's good and greased up. The next thing we're going to do is take our dough and we're going to turn it into a ball in a very particular way. What we're going to do is use your dominant hand to pull it almost from the sides and underneath, and use your other hand to turn it round. But basically, if you follow this method, what will happen is you get a perfectly smooth ball, and all the little joins and all the little creases and things get rolled underneath it where they all smooth out. Pop it in that bowl. The other thing that we need to do is cover this bowl. Now most cookbooks will tell you to use a damp tea towel. What I actually prefer is to use a shower cap. They're perfectly stretchy. They'll stretch all the way around the outside of your bowl, and they'll also stop your dough from drying out, which is really what we're trying to do here. We're going to leave our dough in the bowl like this for maybe 1.5 to 3 hours until it's doubled in width and height. This took me about 1.5 hours, but don't be surprised if it takes 3 hours or so. Okay, so looking at our dough, we can see now that it has doubled in width and height. In fact, it's just started to shrink down a little bit, but a few minutes ago it was pretty much hitting the top of this bowl. With one hand, just take your bowl. With the other hand, just in one piece, if you can, just try and drag the whole dough onto your work surface like that. Next, we're going to take our 4-pound tin that we looked at before. Just get some of the same olive oil that we used before, put a tiny bit in there, and then just smear that around. So just take this big lump and give it about 4 or 5 squashes with your palms. Shape it back into that ball again. I'm going to take a long edge and then just fold it over like this. Take a long edge, fold it over again. Then take the 2 ends and similarly fold those over. Once you've got something kind of vaguely rectangular like this, flip it over, get it into your tin. And it's just going to fill our tin like that, so more or less filling it from end to end. Just get your shower cap, and what we're going to do is wait for this to double in size. Yeah. So we're going to put this somewhere slightly warm and wait for it to do its thing. This last rise takes about 1 hour and isn't normally as slow as the first one. Something else I do with the loaf is to dust it with white flour, any kind of white flour, and then put a long score in it with a knife. It then goes in an oven at 220 degrees Celsius for about 30 to 35 minutes. During this time it will rise and brown in the oven, and in about 35 minutes time you can take it out. And there it is, your very own first white loaf. Let it cool on a wire rack before you cut into it and devour. This goes great with pretty much anything, butter, any kind of filling that you can imagine. Let it cool, slice it up, freeze it, do whatever you want with it, but enjoy your first white loaf.